Doug, welcome to the Easy Conversations podcast. Thank you for joining me this morning. I'm excited about our conversation. We've been able to touch offline briefly and talk about your book and some of the work you're doing and the way you're able to explain economics to people. I think there's a lot of value, especially, in general, I think people don't fully appreciate what's going on with the economy at times and why certain decisions are being made. But I do want to give you an opportunity before we jump into our conversation to share a little bit about yourself with us in terms of who you are, what's brought you here, and what are you doing in the current chapter of your life?
I just finished my book. I shouldn't say just. I finished it quite a while, good bit ago, a year ago, but it's been going through the publication process, and that takes time.
Yes.
It'll be released on January 20th, and I'm really excited about that. I'm really concerned about socialism. I think particularly with the mayoral elections in New York and Seattle, I think it's very clear that socialism is a real threat. And I think too many people don't understand just how great a threat it is. I think they see it as a soft, fuzzy thing instead of what it is in reality.
Mm.
And I'm hoping that my book will help turn that around. I think people need to understand what socialism really is. And
hmm
I think very few do.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I appreciate that. And I do want to get into that. And before we do, are you able to share a little bit about your background and what makes you in a position or puts you in a position to understand socialism, and how are you talking about some of these topics? And obviously, we're going to touch on some of the challenges and the economic problems that you foresee with socialism, but what puts you in a position to be able to see some of the threats that are looming?
I have a Ph.D. in economics, and I have been a mathematician and mathematical modeler for decades. I think particularly in mathematical modeling, it's clear that socialism can't ever work. And so the threat is that I think we're in danger of adopting socialism accidentally. That voters thinking that it means one thing will vote for it and find out too late it means something else.
hmm
I've done a great deal of economic study, and part of my dissertation, in fact, was to basically show that through models and through studying the projections of the Fed, the Federal Reserve, that it's impossible for socialism to work, because in order for it to work, what socialism aims to do is to hire somebody like me, an economist, and say, okay, Dr. Doug, you plan the economy for us. You tell us how many cell phones we need to order a year from now, how many cars we need to order a year from now, what kind of cars are they going to be, what kind of cell phones are they going to be. I couldn't do that. It's because it's impossible. You'd be asking me to predict something that there is just no amount of data or knowledge that I could possibly acquire that will allow me to do that accurately. And we can talk more about that later, but
Yes.
that's
Yeah. And just to ground the listeners and myself, are you able to give us a brief overview of how socialism comes in and what it is at a
sure.
higher level? And then we can maybe start expanding on how is that then becoming a problem?
Sure. Definitionally speaking, socialism is an economic system where the government owns all property and the means of production. Now, many people, maybe most, confuse that with what is loosely called democratic socialism.
Mm.
Democratic socialism is an oxymoron. There is no such thing. Why? Because if the government controls or owns the means of production and all property, how can a democracy function?
Mm.
In other words, if you aren't free to choose what you're going to buy today, is there any democracy in anything but name only? There's only a few countries in the world right now that are truly socialists. North Korea, Cuba, Venezuela. Is anybody that's advocating socialism really thinking that we should make the United States into a country like North Korea?
Hmm.
And I think they aren't thinking that. I
Right.
think they're thinking that they want to make it maybe like the Nordic countries.
Mm.
The Nordic countries are not socialist. You've heard of IKEA. That's a private furniture company. The European countries that many here think of as democratic socialist countries call themselves social democracies. I think that's how the word's gotten mixed up.
Hmm.
A social democracy in Europe means a capitalist country with a slightly larger safety net than what we have in the US. They don't own the means of production. They
Hmm.
haven't taken over all private property. They are not socialist countries by any stretch of the imagination.
Hmm.
They're capitalist countries.
Right.
And in fact, in most of those countries, they have for the past decade or so been backing off of the extent to which their safety nets apply because they're finding out that there's a big problem
Hmm.
even with that much quasi socialism.
Yeah. Yeah, and I live in Canada, so I could see a lot of truth to what you're sharing there. So there is definitely that aspect as well. Now, when we think about socialism, it's easy to look in examples even 100 years ago, looking at the Soviet movement there, and the fear. And is it fair to say that there is a fear that it could easily then slip into communism? And how do you ensure that doesn't happen? Or maybe that's worth talking about further and understanding the
Sure.
potential risk of becoming a socialist country.
Yeah, I think that is the real threat is that you mentioned communism. Communism has never existed and never will. The difference between communism and socialism is, at least in Marx's view,
Hmm.
is that communism exists when socialism becomes so evolved that the government fades out of existence. That's never happened, and that's never going to happen.
Yeah.
Human beings are such that the government fading away is not realistic. Marx was incredibly naive. Depending on how you look at it, Marx is usually thought of as the father of socialism. There were socialistic things before that. Maybe the first well known socialist was Plato.
Mm.
He advocated rule by philosopher kings who were smart and benevolent and could run the country and the economy. And it didn't take long for his star pupil, Aristotle, to say, no, that doesn't work. It's illogical. We can't. And Aristotle is usually called the father of logic.
Mm.
And then there were some collectivist experiments, including in the US. The first colonies here, Jamestown and the Mayflower colony, both started on collectivist principles. And they found out pretty quickly that they were starving.
Mm.
And they were starving because everybody stopped working. There was, they found out
Yeah.
that there was no motivation to work because everybody was sharing stuff. So
Right.
people got slacked off more until the governors of those two respective colonies eventually put in private property and
Mm.
prosperity returned. Now, Marx, in his view, and this is one of the ironies, if you wish, about socialism, is that Marx was raised in the early 1800s and he lived in little towns that were mostly made up of mom and pop shops, is what we would call them today. There was a shoemaker and a bread maker and a blah, blah, blah.
Mhm.
He thought that was the ideal world.
Mm.
And as he grew up and saw corporations, companies, factories start to happen, he thought that was ruining the world.
Mm.
And so he wanted to see the world return to the state he knew as a young man or child. And so essentially, what he was doing was setting out to prevent progress. And that's indeed what socialism does. it prevents progress because it sets up a situation where no one can innovate. Because in order to innovate, you need an entrepreneur with an idea and you need a capitalist to fund it. Because the kind of world we have today can't be possible with a little mom and pop setup. We're not going to have cell phones because mom and pop built those in their basement. We're not going to have automobiles because some guy in his garage is cranking them out one a year. We have to have things scale up. And the only way to do that is with capital.
And to further dive into that, the whole notion of capitalism versus socialism, that's something you and I've chatted about before, but the whole crony piece and government intrusions, are you able to speak to that? And how do we then navigate this debate? And I think you're talking about the scaling up, which is required in a lot of these situations and which requires capital, right? So how do you piece all of that together?
Yeah, you're exactly right. Most of the problems that most people cite about capitalism are not problems with capitalism. They're problems with government. The government jumps in and tries to fix things. And back in my very younger days, I worked for a congressman and I saw firsthand how this all plays out. And you start congressmen get calls from constituents saying, here's my problem. Blah, blah, blah. And there's as a group of that people feeling that start to rise up, the congressman feels under pressure to do something. And the instinct is to do something, anything, just look like you're doing something. And so a whole lot of things get done that aren't well thought out. They're just, let's do something because we have to do something to make the people feel better. And I understand the feeling, but it's not a way to run a government. And too often, the government is co-opted by capitalists. I would be the last one to claim that capitalists are all good guys. Everybody, every profession, every way of being can be corrupted. And everyone has some instinct to transform self-interest into selfishness. Self-interest is necessary for survival. It's a good thing.
Yes.
Selfishness is not a good thing. Greed is not good. And so we rely on government to solve those problems. But too often what happens is like this, an analogy I use in my book is that if someone is burglarizing your house and you call the police and they come and help the burglar load his stuff into their car, I'm somewhat upset with the burglar, but I'm a lot more upset with the police.
Yes.
It was their job to help me and they didn't do it. I live in Arizona, and here in Arizona, we have what are called the open range laws. What that means is if cattle are a problem on your property, it's your lookout. You have to fence them out with a very specific, well-defined kind of fence. How does that make any sense? In other words, if your dog bites somebody, you're responsible. But if a cow crashes through your patio door and eats your furniture, that's your problem.
Right.
And that's because government helped the cattlemen. And I've actually talked to cattlemen about that. And they say, well, don't you want to have cheap beef? And I would say, cheap beef is nice, but you're having cheap beef for the world on the backs of Arizona citizens. That's not nice. I own some acreage here, and I spent hundreds of hours and hundreds of dollars fencing out cattle. It's difficult and it's expensive. It's so bad here in Arizona that if you're driving down an Arizona highway, a cow wanders out into the road and you hit it. If you get killed, your heirs will have to pay for the cow you killed. In my view, that's sick. It's just ridiculous.
Right.
And it's a really good example of crony capitalism, as you mentioned it.
Yeah.
somebody getting special favors from government instead of government acting as the responsible entity that protects the citizens. And that should be government's first and primary job, protect the people.
Yeah, and you're talking about fundamental temptations that humans are prone to, right? So corporate greed, favors, and that will always be the case irrespective of the system. But what I'm hearing from you is that doesn't mean you just throw the baby out with the bathwater when it comes to capitalism, because that's the
No.
argument that people use. Now, on the other side, I do want to explore the whole notion of keeping a level playing field, and then some of the ways that's done in terms of tax hikes. I've read your article on that, and we've talked about it. Are you able to delve into some of the fallacies when it comes to tax hikes and the image that's being sold around that?
Sure. As you said, everybody has these instincts to want to push the boundaries for their own benefit. One of those is, let's see if we can get something for nothing. And so a lot of people, maybe most people, would like to see a tax system where they don't have to pay, but everybody else does.
Right.
And that's started back when Marx first became a thing in the early 1900s, and we put in a progressive tax system. Progressive tax systems and corporate taxes are both things that damage the economy. The first thing that I would say as a principle is that people need to understand that whatever you tax, you're punishing the activity that the taxation caused.
Okay.
So in a progressive tax system, what you're saying is we are going to punish you for producing. The more you produce, the more you get punished. Is that a good thing? I would suggest it's not. And in the article that you cite, and I think the same thing is in the book, I make an analogy of the tax system to people taking a hike. And the way our tax system works, it is as if before a hike, we decide that we're going to tax people, we're going to divide up the packs that people carry and divide them based on the strength of the people on the hike. So the people that are strongest have to carry bigger packs than people that are weaker. It turns out that the strongest person on this hike has to carry 420 pounds. And the weakest 50% don't have to carry anything. 420 pounds? That sounds like a lot. It sounds absolutely ridiculous, but that's exactly the way the U.S. tax system is structured. The wealthiest individuals have to pay 42% income tax. That creates big distortions because now people are incentivized to stop producing and do something else instead. And so that's what they do. They find other ways to manipulate the system and use their money because they're going to look out for themselves.
Yes.
And so what you create is a system where no one gets taxed fairly. I think the fairest system would be a flat tax, because then what are we taxing? We're taxing consumption. So the rich are still going to pay more because presumably they're consuming more.
Right.
But everybody will pay in proportion to what they consume rather than in proportion to what they produce. And that makes it a huge difference, both in how the system reacts and in what ends up happening with the money. Right now, people that have a lot of money spend a lot of time with lawyers and accountants trying to figure out how to game the system.
Right.
And the IRS spends a huge amount of money on lawyers and accountants trying to police the people that are trying to game the system.
Yes.
With a flat tax, all that money is recouped, and ultimately the consumers get that money back. In fact, if we took out government regulations that weren't helping us, we would all get about triple our income. We would have about 3 times the spending money we have now, because a whole lot of that ends up going to lawyers, accountants, and other things that make things cost more.
Mm-hmm.
Recently, I bought a new microwave, and the area I live in, a rural area, we have a fair amount of power failures. And every time the power went off, the microwave would shut itself off, turn itself back on, and reset it with a child safety lock. So that you had to go through this series of crazy combinations to turn the lock off. So I looked it up and I found out that the biggest cause of children getting burned was adults spilling hot water on them.
Mm.
And that children getting burned because they reached into a microwave and pulled out something hot is in the neighborhood of 50 a year. And it's an example of a problem that has cost thousands and thousands of dollars to fix. It wasn't really that much of a problem. It was a problem that required a little bit of parental supervision, not a problem that government should even be trying to solve.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I appreciate that example. And I guess in terms of your proposal around taxing consumption, how do you monitor the consumption side of things? Because
Well,
in my simple view, I think you can definitely keep some sort of views on what the production is, but how do you monitor consumption?
well, here in the US, most states have a sales tax. And so the mechanism is already in place.
Okay. Yeah.
All you have to do is make it a national sales tax, rebate part of it to the states, and you solve the whole problem.
Mm-hmm.
It would require no accountants, no lawyers. You walk into the store, you buy something, and they add on whatever. I would say 15% might be a good number, but that part's certainly discussable.
Yeah.
The other thing is taxing corporations. It's impossible to tax a corporation. It sounds nice,
Yeah.
but here in the US, I'm not sure about Canadian law, but here in the US, corporations have a fiduciary responsibility to never harm the stockholders. What that means is that if the corporation can't do anything that will make the investors pay a penalty. Now, what does that mean in practice? It means that if the government taxes them, they can't take profits away from the investors to pay that tax.
Right.
They have to pass that tax along to the consumer. So it ends up being like a flat tax.
Yeah.
In other words, anybody that buys that product is going to pay the same amount of tax. The catch is that it puts US corporations, or in your case, Canadian corporations, at a deficit compared to foreign corporations that don't have to pay that tax.
Yes.
So it creates side effects, unintended consequences, if you will, that distort the system. And all these little distortions add up and are very expensive to the people.
Yep. Yeah, for sure. And speaking of unintended consequences, we talked about the utopian states. And I think that's, again, in my mind, it could be a pipe dream, but not something, as much as it could be an ideal state, not something we would want necessarily. When you and I had chatted, you had made reference to the Beatles song Imagine. But yeah, what's your view on utopian state? And you can make the case, and I've been paying some attention to that and exploring it a little bit in my own thought processes, but potentially that's where we're headed in a way in terms of everything that's happening. But yeah, I just want to get your thoughts around all of that.
The song Imagine, I'm a big Beatles fan. I'm a John Lennon fan, but John Lennon was not an economist. And so he imagines a state where everything is flowers and unicorns, and you have no private property. You don't need private property because everything you need just appears for you. And the title of the song tells you the story. It's imaginary. It's a state of being that does not and cannot ever exist.
Mm.
First, because of self-interest. And again, that's not a bad thing, but people are self-interested. I would say it's not people. Every living organism is self-interested or it dies. If you put a bale of hay 100 meters from a cow and another one 500 meters from the cow, he's going to go to the one 100 meters away. Because at some level, the cow acts as though it understands that it burns calories to get to the hay to get more calories. And if it burns more calories getting to the hay than it gets from the hay when it gets there, it's going to die. If you put a plant in a room with a window, the plant will always grow towards the window. Now, do cows and plants think about this stuff? Probably not.
Right.
But they act as though they do. They behave self-interestedly.
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of the problem comes from the fact that I would suggest that utopia is the true utopia is a true capitalist state where the government monitors everything well, keeps the playing field level. But I think the reason people don't gravitate toward that is because of spontaneous order. Capitalism, when it's in its best state, operates on spontaneous order. Spontaneous order is messy. It doesn't look like it should work.
Right.
But it does. And it's demonstrably showable.
Mm-hmm.
Our bodies operate on spontaneous order. That is, the cells in our body, we like to think our brain is in charge. Our brain is like the government. It's not in charge in this case. Why not? The cells in your liver don't even know you exist.
Mm.
Your liver is just the environment that they happen to reside in. And they go about their business being little liver cells.
Right.
They are not under your control. Can I prove that? Sure, I can. Half the cells in your body aren't even human. They're viruses, bacteria, fungi. Like right now, I'm getting a little bit of a sore throat. I think I'm catching my wife's cold.
Mm-hmm.
The viruses are doing stuff to my body that my brain is not complicit in.
Yep.
And that's the way our bodies work. It's the parts of our body are only reacting to the environment they find themselves in and doing what they're created to do.
Mm-hmm.
An analogy would be bees and squirrels in the outer environment.
Mm-hmm.
Bees don't go around thinking about, I need to pollinate flowers. That's my job. No, they see their job as gathering honey, gathering stuff to make honey with.
Right.
Squirrels don't go out looking for nuts, hoping to plant trees. They're out there looking for food. It incidentally helps the rest of the environment.
Mm-hmm.
So the environment has evolved in such a way that the actions of bees and squirrels help the entire environment without the bees and squirrels even being aware that they're doing it.
Mm-hmm.
That's the way spontaneous order works. It's where there are lots and lots of actors doing lots and lots of things on their own, and that all coming together for a common good.
Right.
The real problem is it's so messy, and sometimes it goes wrong. In the case of our bodies, you occasionally can get cancer.
Yes.
Hopefully you and I won't, but if we do, what has to happen? Then our brains have to engage, and we have to go, I've got to do something about this.
Mm-hmm.
So we might go get treatment of one kind or another, radiation or surgery or something. That's the job of government. Mm-hmm. That's when our brains do become the governing mechanism and say, there's a problem here. Some of the cells in my body have gone rogue.
Mm-hmm.
They're doing greedy stuff that's going to hurt the whole body. So I have to step in and stop that.
Mm-hmm.
I have to take action to prevent that from happening. That's the legitimate role of government. That's exactly what it should be doing. The problem is that when people look at true capitalism governed by an appropriate government, they don't see how that could possibly work. It looks just messy.
Yes.
We're going to let everybody do their own thing, and somehow that's going to turn out okay. But it does.
Yeah.
And you can see that in the human body can withstand tremendous forces and rebound. You can have an arm cut off.
Yep.
And if you're thinking about removing, if you think about removing that large a piece of your body, and the prediction would be it's going to destroy the body.
Right.
That would be like, let's say, removing 15% of the economy. If we remove 15% of the economy in a true capitalist state, it will evolve around that.
Yes.
And suddenly it'll all be fine again. Now, yes, you're going to miss your arm. That's not a good thing, but you're going to still be alive and be able to be productive and create value.
Yeah.
And so it's a system that evolves in ways that most people can't imagine. And so because of that, they worry.
Yeah. Yeah. And I like that analogy of the body and kind of using that further to explore using the cancer example. Like, spontaneous order ensures everything is working according to a plan, right? But then when you introduce stress and other types of influences, that's when cancer occurs, right? That's what we're starting to understand with the human body, that when one is exposed to constant stress, there are certain factors that affect our health, not only related to cancer, but other types of situations. So how do you then use that example in the spontaneous order, especially with the economy? If you're going to introduce unnecessary stressors, then you're disrupting the system, which would require the government to step in, right? So if you left things the way they're meant to work, things will be fine.
Yeah. As things stand now, most of the stresses on the economy are caused by various entities trying to fix it.
Right.
It's sometimes it's government, sometimes it's unions. Unions have been pushing here in the States for a $15 an hour minimum wage. The whole idea of a minimum wage is challenging for the economy. It creates cancers. It creates problems that then have to be solved by the rest of the economy somehow. So what do we see here in the States? I don't know if you have them in Canada or not. I haven't been in Canada for a while, but it's self-checkout lanes at supermarkets.
Yeah, we have those.
And those things exist because the stores found out that the consumers weren't willing to pay extra to have somebody else check their groceries for them.
Right.
And I experienced that when I was a kid. When I was a junior, senior in high school, I worked at a gas station. And it happened to be at the time when they were phasing out gas station attendants. Why? It wasn't because they didn't personally didn't like me. It was because the consumers were no longer willing to pay to have somebody put the gas in their car for them. And that's the part that is very hard for people to understand. In a free economy, the consumer is the boss. It's the ultimate democracy. The consumers vote with their dollars. And if anything we do to intervene in that system creates imbalances that have to be corrected elsewhere. And so, yes, you can make the minimum wage $15 an hour, but if that made sense, why not make it $1,000 an hour? Why not make it $10,000 an hour? Because everybody realizes that would create distortions, but they think $15 an hour won't hurt, but it does. What it ends up doing is putting people out of work. And so then the question becomes, how do you deal with people that don't have enough money, that are having problems making enough? I would suggest that the first thing starts with the very fundamental ideas of education. And I think this is the part that your listeners may enjoy the most. we're taught that we should work for a living. That's nonsense. We should not work for a living. You can go out, dig up a bunch of holes, fill them all up again, and you've done a lot of work. Why shouldn't you be paid for that?
Right.
Because you created no value. And what we should be doing for a living, what you and I are doing right now, is trying to create value for your listeners. That's what's first and foremost in our minds.
Yes.
Now, sure, you would like to get more listeners. Sure, I would like to sell more books. But the fundamental thing we're doing with both of those is trying to create value for somebody else.
Correct. Yes.
And to paraphrase the Beatles, and in the end, the value you take should be equal to the value you make. That's the ultimate truth of capitalism. That's what capitalism should be. It should be all of us doing everything we can to create value for others, and in the process, benefiting from it.
Yes.
Like the squirrels that are going out gathering nuts to benefit the rest of the squirrels, but in the process, helping the entire environment.
Yes.
And so, yes, there's some self-interest involved, but I don't think either you or I are doing this selfishly. I don't want to hurt your listeners. I'm not going to give them bad advice intentionally in the hopes that they will buy my book. That would be selfishness.
Yes.
What we're doing is maybe self-interested to an extent, but what we're trying to do is create value. And that's what everybody understood that. I think we would eliminate poverty.
Yeah.
Because everybody has value to contribute. Unfortunately, too many people don't know they should be contributing value, and therefore are doing things that work against their abilities to create value.
Yes.
Because they end up stuck in jobs that they hate, doing things that they don't want to do, and therefore doing it relatively poorly. People who are trying to create value automatically do it well.
Yes.
Because they're trying really hard to do something for somebody else. And the companies that are involved could do a lot better to help their employees understand that. And say, I used to be head of a math department, and we had an instructor that very clearly didn't like the job and wasn't doing it very well. And the boss came to me and said, you need to fire this guy. I said, well, give me 6 months or so and let me see what I can do without. And over time, I was able to show him that he was hurting himself. He was doing something that he didn't like doing, that he wasn't doing particularly well, and that he would do really well to look for other opportunities that better suited his mindset and his way of being. And he did. He went off and he resigned and went off and did his own thing and did it well. And that's the way employers need to look at employees, is to say, either we have to try and find a place within our organization that matches what the places that would maximize your ability to create value, or you'll be better off going somewhere that can do that. And there's places for that in all of life. One of my editors, I think her degree was in English Lit, did an amazing job. She been going through my book, found out I'd used the word things, I don't remember, a couple of hundred times. And I said, we need to go back through the book, and every time you use the word things, put in what you were talking about.
Right.
Because you're losing the reader. Because obviously I knew what the things were, but the reader didn't always.
Yes.
Now, in socialism, you don't get to choose your career. So I think I actually put this in the book, that what if she and I had to change places? So she'd be writing a book on economics, which she knew nothing about and could create no value. and I would have to be the one editing it. I'm the world's worst proofreader because I see what was meant. I don't actually see the words even. And in socialism, that's part of what it does that's really bad, is that it assigns people to tasks not based on what value they can create, but based on what the system happens to need at the time. And so if what we need is, I don't know, ditch diggers, we're going to assign this guy with a Ph.D. to be a ditch digger. And so it can't work.
Right.
Because the system can't do that effectively. The other big problem it creates is and that creating value helps, is the idea of meritocracy.
Yes.
We've gotten to the place where people think meritocracy is a bad thing. There's a lot of ways to see the falsity of that, but one of the ways to start to see it is that look at the areas where meritocracy rules. Sports. You look at the Olympic teams here in the US and probably in Canada too, and you'll see they're incredibly diverse. Why? Because it's an area where meritocracy rules. You look at sports, they're incredibly diverse.
Yes.
Why are they diverse? Because there is no punished group, if you want to look at it that way. Nobody's being discriminated against because it's based on merit. And people often ask, what about all the discrimination? Meritocracy is the cure for that. Because meritocracy is colorblind, race blind, religion blind. It doesn't know about any of that stuff. All it knows is who can do what best.
Right.
But not long ago, I read an article that said that people who are physically fit were in danger of becoming right-wing jerks. Because the author's premise was that if you kept yourself in good condition, it would mean you were unable to perceive somebody that was not in good condition, and that would be a problem. I would suggest that's really fuzzy thinking. And in fact, that the reverse is true.
Right.
Later today, I'm going to run and lift weights. I stay in really good shape. Why do I do that? Partly because if I'm not in good shape, physically, emotionally, mentally, financially, I can't help anybody else.
Right.
And I think too many people are incapable of seeing that. The strength is the thing that they're going to turn to when they need help.
Yes. Yes.
And that everyone should be trying to be as strong as they can, not out of selfishness, not because I'm competing with somebody else, that I want to hurt somebody else, but because it puts me in a position to help somebody else.
Right.
I spent time as a martial arts instructor, and both judo and karate. Judo, one of the main maxims is that it's the gentle way.
Yeah.
It's the way you deal with someone that's being aggressive in the safest, least harmful way possible.
Correct.
And in karate, it's the art of the open hand. It means I'm going to do the best I can to not hurt you. And in fact, in karate, one of the things that was drummed into me when I was really young was karate teaches you to run, but to run with confidence. To get out of the situation if you can, but if you have to defend yourself. Right. And now, if someone were to come to me as an instructor and say, I want to learn how to karate so I can beat up my neighbor, I would probably say, you need to go see somebody else. I'm not here to help with that.
Right. Yeah, because that's not creating value, really.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, and I think you've touched on so many things here, and they all tied together, so I'm going to try my best here to piece it all together. But you touched on the tax hikes. We talked about that earlier, and then you talked about merit. And one of the things, I think one of the issues we're seeing is that whole focus on DEI and how that can take away from merit. And you take away, even with tax hikes, the similarity I see is you take away people's incentive to wanting to create value because they're getting punished for what they're bringing forward. And then tying it into the perceived ideal of a utopian state, what I heard from you earlier, and I agree with you, is once that's created, then there's really no incentive for people to create value. And that's where you see people stop working. And that utopian state really shreds us down to nothing. And we need some sort of system where there's meaning in how we conduct ourselves. And once that's taken away,
Absolutely.
is we've lost meaning, then it's all nihilism from there.
Yeah. You mentioned DEI, and part of the idea of DEI is that we should all be equal.
Yeah.
And that's just stupid.
Right.
We aren't equal. No, we should be equal in the eyes of the law.
Yes.
We should be equal in the eyes of society.
Mm-hmm.
But in the book, one of the examples I use, I list a bunch of famous people: Picasso, Paul McCartney, Maya Angelou, Dwight Eisenhower. They aren't equal.
Right.
Would you want to go to a play written by Eisenhower? Would Paul McCartney make a good person to run D-Day? We all have different talents. We all have different ways of maximizing our ability to create value. And that's the ultimate diversity.
Yes.
That's what we should be about, is not being equal, but celebrating our inequality. I couldn't do what you do.
Right.
We're not equal. And that's good.
Right.
You should be doing what you do because you're doing it well.
Yeah.
And we intentionally make sacrifices in some areas to do the things that we want to do. And trying to fix that is a mistake.
Yes.
I'm also a musician.
Yeah.
And as you may or may not know, musicians typically don't make a whole lot of money unless they have a lot of gold records.
Right.
And so if I wanted to spend my life doing nothing but being a musician, I would have to know that the price for that is I may have some struggles financially.
Yes.
Most of the musicians I know do have some struggles financially. But they like that. They want to do what they want to do, and they're willing to pay that price.
Correct.
And who are we as other citizens or as government to step in and say, no, you shouldn't be doing that because you should be making more money. So we're going to do something to make it so you make more money and end up messing up the system in the process.
Right. Yeah. And that goes back to the whole piece of spontaneous order you were talking about, where if you're going to start intervening, you're going to cause more problems than create value. And I think this is probably the theme for today, is value is the most important thing, and we need to focus on that. But yeah, but Doug, thank you so much for this conversation. Really appreciated your insight and wisdom. I really enjoyed talking to you about this subject and understanding from your perspective where you're coming in from. But for listeners that would like to learn more about you and find your work, whether it's your book or your articles, what are some ways they can do that?
I have a website, dougcardell.com. And you mentioned I write a lot of articles. I've got 100 or so probably.
Yeah.
And they explain in less detail some of the things that are explained in my book. My book is Why Socialism Struggles. It's available for pre-order on Amazon. And I hope they'll go out and buy it. I think I tried really hard to create value for people. And I hope that they will buy it and find it valuable to them.
Absolutely. We'll put all of that in the show notes. But Doug, thank you again. Really appreciate your time this morning to chat and do this.
Thank you so much. You've been a wonderful host, and I really enjoyed speaking with you.